Good afternoon, Dr. Sharma. What a blessing to have you on another session of mental health. Welcome, sir.
Good to be back with you, Mark.
Well, you're getting some traction. You have people around the world watching you and enjoy listening to your sessions. And so we thank you for this opportunity. Today is May the 15th, 2020. And as we know, Doc, we are living in a time during this COVID-19 pandemic. We have right now 4.5 million people around the world with COVID-19, of which over 305,000 have died. In the United States, we have 1.4 million people with COVID-19, of which over 86,000 have died. So during this time, we are experiencing a lot of people have lost or know of someone who've died. And I would like to discuss today grief. Would you please offer to us what is grief?
Grief is an emotion that we all will experience at one time or the other, and it's usually as a reaction to loss of life, loss of our dear ones. As people get older, we will go through that process of grieving for them when they pass on. There's also grief related to loss of property and loss of valued possessions and loss of material things. There's also grief related to loss of our own individuality or your own self-esteem, for example, if it's been eroded, loss of occupation. So there's a lot of loss that human beings will experience. The most grievous, of course, being the loss of our loved ones. The most significant stressor that's rated in life that can affect an individual is loss of a human being that is close to us, loss of a spouse, loss of a child, loss of a parent. So these relatives that we lose are going to matter to us. As medical people, as a physician myself, loss of people that I care for will also impact on us. And in this world that we are in now with the COVID crisis, we're seeing people lose relatives, we're seeing people lose loved ones. We're seeing doctors being affected negatively. We saw a doctor who lost her life because she, it's part of how she may have reacted. We don't know for sure, but we as physicians are vulnerable. We're in this profession of care, and nurses and health workers, we're all very vulnerable to this emotion of grief. And grief, which you ask, is very painful. What does it feel like? It's an emotion of significant pain and sorrow and sadness, and extremely hard for the person to bear and cope when they're experiencing that. It's almost like going through a major depression. So that's in a nutshell what it's like, what's grief. It's natural that we will experience it. And it's important in some ways to experience grief, because to deny it is not all that way healthy.
Well, Doc, as for someone who's experiencing that pain from losing a loved one, what would you say are the phases of grief and how long do they last?
A good question, Mark. And Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross describes it beautifully, and I don't think it's really anybody is able to change those phases that she described when she did her work in grief. And it's quite correct that people go through these phases. They don't necessarily follow each other always in the same order, but generally we see a reaction that people have is the first reaction being denial that this has happened. They hear the news of losing someone or the loss of someone's life that's close to them, and the first thing is, no, it's not true. So that denial generally may not be very long, but yet it can be persistent in some persons that they never fully accept that the person is gone and they still believe that the individual is still there and they actually behave as if that person is still around. And that can happen with mothers who lose their a baby that's so emotionally connected to them that they would not let go of the fact that the child is actually gone and that they behave as if the child is still there, making up their room as if the baby is still alive. Then we have another phase of anger where the person may actually feel angry with those who were caring for their relative, the loved one, and it's a displacement of their own emotions onto that individual. So healthcare workers are very vulnerable to being berated that it's your fault, you didn't do this, you didn't advise us, you didn't do the best treatment, and it's a part of the process that persons shouldn't take it personally. Sometimes healthcare workers do make mistakes, so we may feel a sense of guilt. We got to be careful that we're not reacting too much to that, becoming a part of self-blame. Then there's a process of bargaining where the person may bargain even with God and say, can you make this thing go away, this news be reversed, make the person come back to life, and that can go on for also an abnormal long period. And it's resolved though with coming through another very intense period of emotional pain called depression, followed by acceptance. So the end phase of grief is acceptance that this has happened.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you. What is atypical grief?
Atypical grief is usually something that would go on for much longer than what we'd expect. Usually, grief would last for about a month to 2 months, where it's very severe, it's intense. The person is experiencing almost, as I said, a severe depression. It's almost very similar, except that there are some differences between grief and a major depression. The person may not be suicidal as the person with major depression, or they also may have very good moments, the person with grief, where they'll function okay, whereas depression tends to be constant and pretty severe most of the time of the day. So the person with grief would get momentary episodes which can be extremely intense, where they need the time out to cry and to let out feelings, and those can be overwhelming. Like depression, the person can also experience severe loss of appetite and weight loss. So they're very similar, and they're very parallel, but grief tends to subside with time, with support and care, whereas major depression will go on. When we talk about atypical grief, we're talking about a grief that does not follow that process, where a person may be stuck in any one of those phases. So what Kubler-Ross described is a process of people going through those three phases for different periods of time, so the more healthier the reaction would be, the shorter the phases to come into the point of acceptance. So when we lose somebody who we expect to go, those phases tend to be shortened because people have already accepted that that loss will happen. Whereas somebody who it's not expected, like losing a child, to this COVID crisis or some other situation that's traumatic, will lead to longer periods of denial and disbelief and disorganization and confusion. So we call it typical grief when it extends too long, when the intensity is too severe, when the person may start to experience strange feelings and even thoughts of wanting to harm themselves because there's some amount of self-blame, or they feel that they should have gone also because they don't deserve to live while the person that they love so much has died. So those make up the typical grief. We also see what we call pathological symptoms of persons hallucinating Whilst hallucinations are in keeping with normal grief, a person can actually see visions of the individual they lost coming back and sitting in the room, and it's very unusual and very strange. That is not necessarily atypical grief. It's when it becomes extremely intense, they lose their ability to function, they may go into extreme depressions, or they may start to have psychosis, like hearing a lot of voices or become extremely confused, or starts to entertain thoughts of wanting to die. That's really not healthy. And that type of grief may require medical care, whereas normal grief probably just needs supportive care and time.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you. How would you say does grief resolve? Is it to the point of acceptance, whether it is viewed as normal grief or atypical? Would that be the point where we can say that the grief is resolved? Is at the point of acceptance?
Yes, the point of acceptance is the end point. And as I said, it can happen fairly quickly. A physician, for example, who will grieve over a patient will also realize that that had its process, and what can you do? So we tend to accept um, fairly quickly that this is the situation, and move on. Because if a physician or a healthcare worker or a nurse were to continue to suffer pain over the loss of a patient, it's really not healthy for them, because it can affect the way they manage another patient. So grieving can go on very quickly, but it has to end with that acceptance. With atypical grief, people can continue to be in denial or really continue to be angry, and they take out anger in forms of litigation, for example, against the healthcare workers or person they feel might be to blame for the loss of that loved one. We're seeing a lot of anger going on now against this in this time of crisis with the COVID virus, where people are blaming governments. There's anger towards persons in leadership. There's anger towards the healthcare profession. And that's part of the grieving process. That we're seeing something that we have lost. We've lost a way of life that we had, and we're just sort of lashing out to see who can I blame this on. It's a matter of time, a process. We will come through this crisis, and we'll come to the point of acceptance. We've lost a lot of people in this world, and we all grieve for those who have gone, and we grieve for those who are grieving for them. So it's understanding, Mark. The more understanding that we have, the more acceptance that we can gain, the more healthy we can become.
That is so true, Doc. That is so true. As a matter of fact, as you know, in our culture, when someone dies, the a lot of people fly in from different parts of the world for the funeral, and many times, as we wait during that period of time, we are grieving, and many times it seems like we finally accepted at the burial. And what we're finding right now with COVID-19 is you cannot even have a regular funeral. You cannot even have a regular burial. So my final
You're right.
question is, how can we help someone overcome grief?
You're right. And again, those moments of being able to share and comfort and be collective with each other and go through the rituals that we must go through are very healthy. So once we understand that this is a time where persons have to be very careful and keep apart, again, trying to connect by social media, offering support, being very open about crying, because crying is actually a healing force that we let out those negative emotions. Talking about our angry feelings, let it be out there. Put it on the table. Let if there are angry feelings to say the healthcare persons who may have been involved in the care, somebody who's gone, let them know that we felt that this could have been different. Let them have an opportunity to say what they could have done better. So it's a communication process. I think it's also important that those rituals are maintained. That even if they have to be done through the through this kind of media that we use, um, it's done, and that people are not deprived of that opportunity. Thank God, it's still we're able to communicate. The opportunity to physically be with that person to say goodbye may not be there. If it's there and persons can maintain physical distance and safety procedures, then by all means, let's do that. There must be a lot of support and understanding and comfort provided. We always advocate for workplaces giving people not necessarily leave, but time off during the time of work to be able to have moments where they can go through periods of grief. Places of care should always have places that people can have some solitude and comfort. And counselors need to be available for people who need to have more expert help. You know, medications are not the way to manage grief. It is really a process of supportive care time. Though in some cases we do use, if it becomes a little bit of a pathological process, sleep is extremely bad, the persons are entertaining very bad thoughts of self-harm and so on. When they may have moved from a grief situation to an extreme depressive situation. With support, Mark, with the kind of comfort that your spiritual help can provide with guidance, with education, great understanding, we will come through this so that we can lessen the grief that's happening. And again, thank you for having me. And I know that we can reach out and offer those lines of support. You were doing that the last time, that there are phone lines available that people should call in. Don't keep the thoughts, don't keep those feelings to yourself. Let it out, let it be shared, or sharing is comfort.
Thank you so much, Doc. It is so important, and for us to continue to remind people that there is help, and there are
Yeah.
people like yourself and ministers and individuals who can truly help you in that process. And so it is important
And
for
there's
us.
grief support groups, people who have lost, for example, a mother's lost a child, there are support groups, and that those work really well because those persons have been through it. They know what grief is like. And those people who believe that they don't experience grief, they're denying to themselves that emotional experience that they should have, because going through grief does help us to become stronger as individuals. We have to experience it. We are going to lose loved ones that were there, that's important for us in our lives. It's a life process.
Thank you so much, Doc. I look forward to seeing you once these flights open. Look forward for us to continue our outreach and serving the people of Guyana. But I'm thankful you are there and be able to help so many people. And thank you. May God richly bless you. And we look forward to another session very soon.
Thank you, Mac. You have a great day.